It is 90,000 years ago. Someone you loved has died, and instead of walking away, your group does something strange, something no animal does. You dig, you arrange the body with care, you place objects beside it, things the dead person will apparently need. Need where, for what? You're acting as if this isn't the end, and that single act may be one of the oldest clues to the human soul we will ever find. Because think about what you just did. You spent energy. Real energy meant survival. You dug into hard ground with your hands and simple tools, you gave up objects your living group could have used, tools and ornaments and food, and you put them in the dirt with a body that, as far as the cold logic of survival is concerned, is now just meat that can no longer help you. From a pure survival standpoint, this behavior is insane. It is a waste. It makes no sense at all. Unless the people doing it believed on some level that the story wasn't over, that the person hadn't simply stopped, that where they were going, they would need those things. And I want you to hold on to how high the cost of that belief really was, because it is easy to miss from where we sit. You live in a world of surplus. Giving away an object barely registers. But in the Paleolithic, every tool was hours of labor. Every scrap of food was measured against hunger. A carved ornament represented time that could have been spent hunting, gathering, staying alive. These were people living close to the edge, where a hard winter could erase a whole group. And these same people, under that kind of pressure, chose to take valuable things out of the world of the living and bury them in the ground. That is not a casual gesture. That is one of the most expensive votes of belief a struggling human group could possibly cast. You don't pay that price for a superstition you half hold. You pay it for something you feel in your bones is true. Here is the thing nobody tells you about the afterlife. It did not begin in a temple. It did not come down from a priest or a holy book or an organized religion with rules and buildings and a name. All of that came much, much later. The belief that death is not the end appears to be far older than any of it. It shows up in the ground in the way humans treated their dead tens of thousands of years before anyone could write a single word about heaven. The afterlife didn't come down from the sky. It came up out of a grave. And by the end of this video, I want you to see why that might be one of the most profoundly human things our species has ever done. Let's start with why burial itself is so strange. Almost no animal does this. When an animal dies, other animals move on. There are a few remarkable exceptions, elephants pausing over the bones of their dead, some primates carrying a lost infant for a while, and those moments are genuinely moving, and they hint that the roots of grief go deep, but no animal digs a grave. No animal arranges a body, and critically, no animal brings gifts. The deliberate, careful provision burial of the dead with objects placed for the journey is a signature. It is one of the clearest lines we have ever found between the human mind and every other mind on Earth. And I want you to really feel how odd this behavior is, because familiarity has worn the strangeness off it. We're used to funerals. We grow up with them. So we forget that, viewed from the outside, tending to the dead is one of the least logical things a survival machine could possibly do. Every other pressure in a prehistoric human's life pushed the other way. A dead body is a health hazard. It attracts predators and scavengers. It carries disease. Cold, practical logic says get away from it, fast, and don't look back. That is what survival would tell you to do. Instead, our ancestors did the opposite. They drew closer, they lingered. They handled the body with what can only be called tenderness. They spent time and energy and risk on a being that could never repay any of it. Whatever was driving that behavior was strong enough to override some of the most basic survival instincts we have. And that is your first clue, because a drive that powerful, that willing to defy self-preservation is not a small quirk. It is coming from somewhere deep in what we are. So let's talk about what is actually in the ground, because the evidence is more remarkable and more moving than most people realize. Let's start with the Neanderthals because they complicate the story in the best way. For a long time, we told ourselves that our thick-browed cousins were brutes, incapable of the rich inner life that makes us us. But the ground keeps arguing otherwise. At a site called Shanidar Cave in the mountains of Iraq, archaeologists uncovered a series of Neanderthal remains that changed the conversation. One individual, Shanidar 1, an older male, had survived devastating injuries, a crushing blow to the head, a withered arm, damage that would have left him dependent on others for years. He was cared for. Someone kept him alive long after he stopped being useful in any survival sense. And around some of the Shanidar dead, researchers found concentrations of ancient flower pollen, leading to the famous and hotly debated idea that these Neanderthals may have buried their dead on beds of flowers. Now, I have to be honest with you, because this channel doesn't do fairy tales. That flower burial claim is contested. Some researchers argue the pollen was carried in by burrowing rodents, not grieving mourners. The debate is real and it is not settled, but here is what is harder to explain away. the care, the healed injuries, the repeated use of the same cave for the dead. Even the most skeptical reading of Shanidar leaves us with a group of beings who did not simply discard their dead. Something in them resisted the idea of just walking away. Now let's move to our own kind, and the evidence gets almost overwhelming. Go back around 10000 years to sites like Qafzeh in what is now Israel. Here we find some of the earliest clear intentional burials of modern humans' bodies deliberately positioned. And with them, red ochre, a pigment the color of blood, the color of life itself, used to mark the dead. Think about that choice. Of every color they could have reached for, they reached for red, the color that pours out of a wound, the color of the living body used. It seems to accompany the dead. That is not an accident. That is a symbol. And a symbol means a mind reaching for meaning. And then there is Sungir. I've mentioned this site before, and I will keep coming back to it because it may be the single most staggering burial in the prehistoric record. In Russia, around 34,000 years ago, people buried their dead with a level of care that is almost impossible to believe. One grave held a man covered in thousands of individually carved ivory beads. And near him, two children, buried head to head, adorned with something like 10,000 beads between them, along with spears made from straightened mammoth tusks, a technology so difficult. We still aren't sure how they did it, and if you want to see just how deep this impulse might run, consider a discovery that has genuinely divided the scientific community. In a deep, almost inaccessible cave system in South Africa, researchers found the remains of a creature called Homo naledi, a small-brained distant relative of ours, in a chamber so hard to reach that the team argued the bodies must have been placed there deliberately, carried in the dark, deep underground, and left. If that interpretation holds, and it is fiercely debated, it would mean the impulse to do something with our dead, to not just abandon them, might be older and more widespread than anyone dared to guess, reaching back to relatives with brains a third the size of ours. I'm not telling you that is settled. It absolutely isn't. But even as a possibility, it tells you how deep these roots might go. Do the arithmetic of love here. Experimental archaeologists have tried to recreate those beads, and the estimates run to something like an hour of skilled work per bead. Thousands of beads, that is thousands of hours, months of a person's life, maybe years of collective labor, carved by firelight, and then placed in the ground with the bodies of children and buried, never to be seen again. You do not do that for a body you believe is simply gone. You do not spend months of your one short dangerous life adorning a corpse you think is nothing. That labor is a statement. It says, this person still matters. This person is going somewhere. This person deserves to arrive well. Whatever exactly they believed, they did not believe that death was a simple full stop. They believed it was a threshold, a door, a journey with a destination, which brings us to the pattern underneath all of it. Across the ancient world, in cultures separated by oceans and tens of thousands of years, cultures that never met and never could have shared a single idea, we find the same behavior appearing again and again. Grave goods, provisions for the dead, tools, food, ornaments, weapons, placed with the body as if for a trip. The specific objects change, the specific objects change, the specific rituals change, but the underlying logic is astonishingly consistent. The dead are going somewhere, and we are sending them off prepared. When you see the same idea emerge independently over and over, in minds that never touched, you are no longer looking at a local custom. You are looking at something deeper, something coming from the structure of the human mind itself. This is the same logic scientists use everywhere to separate a passing fashion from a fundamental truth about human nature. If one culture buries its dead with provisions, that is a custom. Interesting, but local. It could have been invented once and copied. But when you find the impulse appearing in Ice Age Europe and in ancient Africa and in the Americas and across Asia and among peoples who were separated for tens of thousands of years with no possible contact, copying is off the table. Nobody taught anybody. Each of these peoples arrived at the same behavior on their own because something in the shared human mind kept pushing them toward the same conclusion. The dead go somewhere. Send them prepared. That is not a meme spreading across a map. That is a feature of the species expressing itself independently, again and again wherever humans and death met. So let me throw something at you that might sound wild, but I think it is the real heart of this whole question. The reason the afterlife is so ancient, so universal, so impossible to stamp out may be that the human mind is fundamentally structurally incapable of believing in its own end. Let me explain what I mean, because this is the key that unlocks everything. Somewhere in our evolution, humans develop something psychologists call theory of mind. It is the ability to model other minds, to know that other people have thoughts, feelings, intentions, and inner world just like yours. It is one of the superpowers of our species. It is why we can cooperate, deceive, empathize, love. You are running it right now, imagining what I'm thinking as I say this. It is the foundation of everything social about us, but theory of mind has a strange and profound side effect. Onsen, you can model minds, including your own. You build a sense of an inner self, a continuous someone who is always there behind your eyes. And here is the problem. That machinery cannot picture its own absence. Try it right now. Try to genuinely imagine being dead, not lying in a grave watching. No thoughts, no darkness, no waiting, no you to experience the nothing. You can't do it. Nobody can. The very thing you would use to imagine it, your mind, is the thing that has to be switched off. Every time you try to picture your own non-existence, there is still a little you in there watching. A hidden observer that will not leave. Psychologists sometimes point to exactly this. Our intuition insists that consciousness continues because we literally cannot simulate its ending. And so when someone dies, the most natural thought in the human mind is not they have ceased to exist. That is almost impossible to truly feel. The natural thought is they have gone somewhere. Because your mind cannot generate the concept of a person simply stopping, it can only generate the concept of a person leaving. Do you see what that means? Belief in an afterlife might not be a hopeful story we bolt on to soften death. It might be the default output of a mind built to model continuity, running into the one event it cannot compute. The afterlife isn't necessarily wishful thinking. It may be the shape our cognition naturally takes when it collides with death. Our ancestors, standing over that first grave 90,000 years ago, weren't inventing a comforting lie. They were feeling the same thing you feel at a funeral, the deep, gut-level refusal to believe that the person is simply permanently gone, and they acted on it. They packed a bag for the journey their minds insisted must be happening, and there is a fascinating piece of evidence that this is baked in, not taught. Psychologists have studied how young children reason about death, and something striking shows up. Even before anyone teaches them about souls or heaven, children often intuitively grasp that the body stops, the heart, the breathing, the need to eat, while insisting that the mind continues, that the dead person still knows things, still wants things, still feels. The biological facts of death are learned, but the intuition that the inner person carries on seems to come almost for free, arriving before the instruction. It looks less like something we're taught and more like something we're born reaching for, which is exactly what you'd expect if it is a side effect of how the mind is built rather than a doctrine handed down. That is the deep engine under 90,000 years of graves. Not stupidity, not mere hope, a structural feature of consciousness itself, showing up in a child, showing up in you, showing up in the oldest burials we have ever found. Now, we have to talk about the harder side of this, because this belief has never only been a comfort. Here is the uncomfortable turn. An idea this powerful, this deep, this universal, is also one of the most powerful tools of influence ever to exist, because the moment a belief in the afterlife becomes organized, the moment it acquires rules and gatekeepers, it becomes leverage. If someone can convince you that what happens after you die depends on what you do now, and that they hold the key to the door, they hold enormous power over your one life. Do this, and paradise awaits. Break this rule, and something worse waits. Whole hierarchies, whole institutions, whole systems of control have been built on the promise of the world to come. And I want to be careful and fair here. For countless people across history, the belief in an afterlife has been a genuine, profound source of comfort, of meaning, of the strength to bear the unbearable, the loss of a child, the fear of one's own death. That comfort is real, and I would never mock it, but the same door that offers comfort can be used to control. The same longing that helps a grieving mother sleep can be aimed by others at obedience, at sacrifice, at getting people to accept suffering now, for a reward they'll never be able to confirm. The instinct is ancient and, at its root, almost innocent, a mind refusing to let go. What some humans have built on top of it is a different story. So did ancient humans believe in an afterlife? And here I have to give you the honest answer, the one this channel always owes you. We cannot climb inside a 90,000-year-old mind. Belief doesn't fossilize. We can dig up a grave, but we cannot dig up a thought. We don't know if they pictured a paradise or a shadowy underworld or a return to the ancestors or a rebirth or something so different from our categories that we'd have no word for it. The specific content of what they believed is gone, and it is gone forever. But here is what the ground tells us, and what it tells us is extraordinary. They did not treat death as the end again and again across the whole span of our species and even beyond it into our Neanderthal cousins. Humans dug graves, arranged their dead with care, marked them with the red of life, and packed them provisions for a journey. They spent precious energy, precious resources, precious hours of their short lives acting on the conviction that the dead were going somewhere and could be helped on their way. Whatever they believed in detail, they believed in something after. The refusal to accept the end is written into the oldest layers of who we are, and you carry it still. That is the part I want to leave you with. You may consider yourself a modern, rational person. You may not hold any traditional belief about what comes after at all. And yet, stand at a graveside and watch what your mind does. You will find yourself talking to them, thinking of them as somewhere, somehow still able to hear you. You will feel, against all your reasoning, that they haven't fully gone. That instinct isn't weakness, and it isn't foolishness. It is 90,000 years old, at least. It is the same instinct that made someone in the deep dark of prehistory kneel over a grave and place a carved bead beside a child, because the thought of that child simply ending was one the human mind has never, in all its history, been able to bear. They looked at death and refused to believe it was the end. And so, quietly at every funeral, in every whispered word to someone gone, do you? So here's my question for you. When you lose someone, do you feel them as simply gone or as somewhere else? Be honest with yourself. I'd genuinely like to know how it sits with you. Let me know in the comments. Until then, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you soon.